So today we've got a fun project for you that you can either give as a gift or you could use as a family project for Christmas Eve. That's coming up. Hello everyone, my name's Daniel Reach. This is Weaver Leather Supply. You might know me from my YouTube channel, the Leatherverse. It can be a real challenge getting our family involved in this hobby that we love so much, right? The tools are intimidating, the patterns can be intimidating. Sometimes they're just not that into it, right? I mean, especially with the spouses. Well, today we've got a project for you that not only can you tool and then use as a project, a fun family project for Christmas Eve, but they also make great gifts. So you could tool these, paint these, and then give them away. The nice thing about this project is it's really a beginner level project that even upper level craftsmen can enjoy. If you can use a swivel knife and you can use a bevel, you can do this. If you feel like you need to brush up on those skills, we just did a swivel knife and a bevel tutorial, so we'll put a link in the description below so that you can brush up on those skills before you jump into the project. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and trace the pattern. So today we're going to be using the ornament kit from Weaver, and it comes with 10 different pieces so that you can make 10 different ornaments. Well, we're going to take a little bit of a different approach to it today. We're going to use 6 of those to create 3 ornaments, and obviously we're going to be creating a front and back. We're going to stitch them together. These are fairly small pieces of leather. They're like 4 inches across or something like that, right? Well, that can be very difficult to hold stationary and work your bevel and work your maul. One of the things that I found is that you can actually take these and tape them to a piece of mat board. That's going to give you a much larger surface. It's easier to control them, and it's just easier to work with. The key though is making sure that you're using mat board and not cardboard or foam board. Cardboard and foam board work great if all you're doing is tracing, but if you're wanting to tool on top of it, you need something that's a thinner profile and a tighter density. So mat board's what you want to go with for that if you decide to use that trick. And that's going to take us to our next step, which is cutting in the design. Couple of tricks here. Number one, we want to make sure that when we cut it in, we've got nice, long, smooth strokes, same as any other project that we work on. The other is that, especially with the Santa Claus and the spiral, we don't want to take these cuts all the way to the edge. We want to stop maybe 1/8 of an inch away from the edge so that we don't run that swivel knife cut right off the edge. With the snowflake, the big thing is that we want to make sure that these lines don't intersect, right? We've got a crisscross pattern here. Well, we want those lines, well, one line can go all the way across, but the rest of them need to stop just short of actually intersecting with each other. We can connect them with the stylus when we go in and do that. But with this one, you want to make sure that the lines don't connect. So once you got everything cut in, we can move on to beveling. Now, most of them are going to be fairly straightforward. In fact, this is the easiest one of all of them. I'll show you this one in just a second. Santa Claus is probably going to be the second easiest. Obviously, you're going to bevel the top of the belt to the top and the bottom of the belt to the bottom, and the same with the fur. Pretty straightforward, right? The spiral is the only one that can get a little tricky. We don't want to just bevel everything the same direction. We want to bevel opposite sides of the stripes. Now you can bevel opposite sides of the red stripes or opposite sides of the white stripes, whatever you want to do. But if you want to make those look like they're raised, then what we need to do is we'll bevel the first one, we'll skip one, we'll go to the next one and bevel it, we'll skip one, we'll bevel the next one, and then once we get all the way across by skipping every other one, we're going to turn it over, and then we're going to bevel all the ones that we skipped. And what that's going to do for us is make sure that each of the lines are beveled opposite directions. And by beveling them opposite directions, that's going to create the look that we want where it looks like every other stripe is raised. Now, when it comes to the snowflake, this one's super easy. All we're going to do is we're going to take the pointy end of our stylus and we're going to trace through the lines. Every single line. It doesn't matter if it's a hash mark or if it's one of the lines. If it's a dot, just take the end of your stylus and press it into it, and that'll give you the dot that you're looking for. But we're not going to bevel this one. We're just going to use the stylus. The goal here is to open up those cuts so that when we go back with the antique has somewhere to sit. It'll actually sit down in there and we'll wipe it off, and we get that look that we're going for but you don't actually need to bevel this one. So out of the 3 ornaments that we're doing today, Santa is the one that really needs some texture. The spiral ornament and the snowflake ornament, they really don't need any texture, but Santa's jacket and the fur, they both need some texture. Otherwise, they look pretty flat. So the way that we're gonna add some texture to the jacket on Santa is we're gonna take a matting tool, and then we're gonna secure some cloth to the end of it. Now I'm using burlap because it's got a nice heavy grain. You might have something else that would work just as well. I've used burlap for this, and it really is perfect. So if you can get your hands on some burlap at a fabric store, at an antique store, that's probably what you want to do. If you don't have burlap, then you could probably find some other heavy grain texture that you can use to do this with. But for now, what we're going to do is we're going to take the burlap, we're going to cut a little piece, we're going to put it over the end of the matting tool, and then we're going to secure it with some wax thread. Now you can secure it with a zip tie or whatever else you want. I happen to have some wax thread, so that's what I used. We're going to use the burlap on any part of the ornament that would be red, any part of Santa's suit that's red. And the trick to making this work, there's 2 of them. Number 1, we really just want one pass over it. Otherwise, it starts getting real muddy. To get the texture that you're looking for, just one pass as best you can with the burlap, and that's it. The other trick is that you want as light of a strike on the maul as you can and still get the texture in the leather. You do that and you should be good to go. So now that we've got the texture added to the red portion, how do we add texture to the fur? Because we're not trying to create a hair texture, we're trying to create a fur texture. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna take our stylus, we're gonna go in and just do small little lines, circles, space them out a little bit. We don't want them right on top of each other. You can even take the end of your stylus and press into it a little bit and create some divots. The goal here is we're trying to create texture and depressions that's gonna hold antique in the later steps. You really can't mess this up. Take your time, don't be scared. It's really easy to do. Take your stylus, scratch in some texture, and then I'll see you on the next step. Now that the tooling's done, we can move on to painting, and this is really where they're gonna come to life. We're gonna start with white. We're gonna do all 3 of them. Where's my other one? So we're gonna do all 3 of them. Then we're gonna change colors and move on. We're gonna start with a spiral. So all the paints that we're using today are going to be Angelus. We're going to use white, red, and black. And there's one other wild card that's not an Angelus, but I'll show you that in just a second. As you're going through painting it, make sure you're getting nice crisp edges. They don't have to be perfect. We're going to use antique. That's going to clean it up, but you do want nice crisp edges. The other thing is it might take more than one coat. Angelus covers really well, but even with that, sometimes you need a second coat, sometimes even a third to get a nice, smooth, rich texture. So real quick, while we're painting the ornaments, if you're finding the video helpful, we would very much appreciate it if you give us a thumbs up. Tells Weaver, tells me, and tells YouTube that we're on the right track and that we should keep making more videos like this. So if you could, give us a thumbs up if you're enjoying the video and you're finding it helpful. Once you got the spiral done, we're gonna move on to the snowflake, paint the whole thing. Then you can jump over to Santa. We're gonna paint the fur, front and back. Question for you real quick. Would y'all want some videos on how to paint and create layers and that kind of thing? I know we're doing the stuff with the airbrush. We're going to continue doing that. But what about more traditional painting? Would y'all want some videos on that? Let me know in the comments if that's something that you'd be interested in. Once you got the white done, we can move on to red. So you're going to paint every other stripe on the spiral ornament, and you're going to paint the portions of Santa's jacket that would be red. We're going to add depth to it in a little while with the antique. Once the red's done, we can go ahead and paint the belt on Santa. We're gonna paint the whole thing black, including the area where the belt buckle's at. I think I forgot to mention it a few minutes ago, but we're also using Angelus gold, the metallic gold. I'm using the 18 karat gold, but you can use whichever gold that you have from Angelus. Paint the buckle. I added in a little bitty tick mark right there just to illustrate where the bar would come through the belt. I wanted that in there. You don't have to do that if you don't want to, but I kind of like it. So, and just real quick, while you're painting that buckle, the reason we want a black base for the metallic gold is anytime you're working with metallics or chrome or anything like that, they're always going to come out a lot richer, a lot more vibrant if they have a black or dark base, and then you add the metallic on top of it. So that's why we're doing that. So now that we're done with the paint job, we can move on to antiquing. But before we do that, it's really important that we seal the project. If we don't, that antique's gonna get down in the paint, it's gonna muddy it up, it's gonna darken it up, and it's really gonna look terrible. In fact, you're probably gonna have to end up repainting the project. That's why my rule is, anytime I'm sealing a project that has paint on it, the rule is no contact at all. That way there's zero chance of lifting off any of the paint. Now, my favorite way of doing this is using leather sheen. It has a waxy base to it. You hold it maybe 10, 12 inches, maybe a little bit more off of the project. I'm gonna put 8 to 10 light coats on there. We don't want any moisture or residue on it at all. We want very light coats. It should almost dry on contact. And if you do that, then what's gonna happen is it's gonna lock that color in. You're not gonna run the risk of actually having some of your paint lift off. So for the antiquing process, we're gonna start with a snowflake. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna make our own antique. And this is something I get asked about all the time. Everybody wants a recipe. They wanna know what ratios they should use. And the reality is there is no ratio because every project is different. So the way I do it is I'm gonna get my Beveling's Neutral Antique. I'm gonna scoop out maybe a half teaspoon or something like that. I'm gonna put it on my palette, which is most of the time it's gonna be scrap leather. Then next to that, not on top of it, but next to it, I'm gonna put the paint that I'm gonna mix into it. By having them separated and mixing them in slowly, it gives me the best shot at getting the color I want because I can mix it in as slow as I want to and I can test it out. Once you got the color you want, go ahead and put it on your snowflake, cover the whole thing, no reason to be neat about it. Then you can pretty much immediately wipe it off. Now I use a paper towel because I like how smooth of a surface it is. It doesn't get down in the crack, so it just takes the bulk off the top of it. Then we're gonna let it sit for a little while and let the antique really set in and dry. This is a great time to go ahead and get the silver out and paint the cap on your snowflake. I think in the beginning I said there was gonna be something like 3 paint colors or something like that. Yeah, I was way off. I must be getting senile in my old age or something because there's like 6 or 7 colors. But go ahead and paint the cap silver, then we can move on to painting the highlights on the snowflake and the other 2 ornaments. So the next step's one that might throw some of you for a loop. We're actually gonna use black antique to antique not only Santa, but the spiral. And the idea here is we're wanting to add some depth to it. And it's gonna work really well on both of them. If you have a different color you'd like to use, go ahead. But I would suggest that you use a darker color for both of them. I'm using black. Now, one thing I'll mention is that it's gonna mute the colors just a little bit on you. That's no big deal. I can show you how to fix that. We'll address that in a couple of the steps coming up. So once you got the antique wiped off, you're gonna wanna take these and set them aside for about a half hour to 45 minutes, something like that. The reason for that is we want the antique to really set so it's not gonna move around. In the upcoming steps, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a paintbrush and we're gonna add some highlights in here. And what we don't want to happen is for that paintbrush with the wet paint on the end of it to grab that antique and really start moving it around. That's gonna create a muddy mess. So go ahead and sit them down, let them sit there for about a half hour to 45 minutes, whatever it takes for the antique to set in so it won't move around. And then we can jump to the next step, which is adding the highlights. So really the 2 that are gonna need the highlights added back in are gonna be the spiral and Santa. And I started with the spiral. All you have to really do is go through and paint the white parts. With this one, we don't want to get all the way up to that antique that we just put on. We wanna kind of paint down the middle of it and blend the edges out. As we go through and we do Santa, what we want to do is we want to take a really thin brush and kind of paint between the antique. And this is just creating little thin highlights in there. Be careful not to paint over the antique that's down in the divots. And that's going to give you the depth that you're looking for. So that's going to bring us to the specialty paints that I mentioned earlier. One is Deco Art Enchanted Shimmer, and the other one is Deco Art Enchanted Holographic. Yeah, it's blue. But these are perfect for adding subtle shimmer to projects, especially if it's kind of a wintry type feel. And what we're gonna do, you can either use one or both, but what you wanna do is anything that's white on any of the 3 projects, we're gonna add that shimmer to it. So if you're gonna use both, I would start with the blue one and add the shimmer to the top of that. If you just want to do the shimmer or the holographic one, you can add it to either one. But the idea is to go through and paint anything that's white. So once you finish adding the shimmer to it, all that's left to do is assemble them. And it's really easy. All we're gonna do is we're gonna add a bead of white glue all the way around the inside, put them together and let them dry. Once the glue sets, you can grab your wing dividers, set them to 1/8 of an inch, scribe a line all the way around the outside, and now we're ready to stitch them. So you might notice that my ornaments are a little puffy. right? You see that? They're not completely flat. And the reason they're like that is I started here and I worked my way around. So let's say I started at about 7 o'clock and I worked my way around back to about 4 or 5 o'clock, something like that. And I left the bottom of it open, and then I stuffed cotton batting up in there, and then I finished stitching it closed. And that gave it a little bit of a three-dimensional kind of puffy look. They're not round by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a nice kind of puffy look to them. Now, as far as stitching goes, Chuck did an amazing video on how to use a stitching chisel and how to saddle stitch. So we're gonna put a link to that video in the description below. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, give us a thumbs up. I'll see you in the next video. And in the meantime, go make something amazing.